Welcome to Obsession Engineering and a bit of an update on the Rapid Honda Superbike. Trust me, this is the Rapid Honda Superbike, but it is in a few pieces. It's not long until we go testing, and finally the postman has been gracing us with lots of bling for our bike. And so we've got it on the bench and we're taking bits apart and changing a few bits and learning how things go together and getting all our settings written down and all that exciting stuff that goes with getting a superbike ready to go on track. So I suppose the first thing will be to take the shock and the swinging arm out and give them a check, a measure, a clean, see how it all works, and we'll comment on the front end later. This is the shock out of our Rapid Honda Superbike, and there are quite a few little differences between this and the sort of aftermarket normal shock you'd buy for your motorbike, your normal Öhlins. And so this is the Superbike level shock. So let's have a look at what's actually different. Let's start with the name. This is an RSP40. So this is actually a twin tube 40mm shock. So a bit like a TTX36, it is twin tube, so there's another tube in there that separates the compression and the rebound. That makes the damping completely separate, which means your adjustments are a little bit more accurate. Compared to the TTX36 or the Batubo equivalent or whatever, and even the DDS, this has a slightly bigger piston, so it's a slightly bigger body and a slightly bigger piston, hence why it's a 40mm, not a 36. That means you're moving more oil, and the actual shim stacks that sit in here, they're slightly bigger as well, so you get a slightly different range of damping. Down here we have a spec, so basically what compression and rebound shim stack dimensions we've got in the bike and what top out spring we've got in it, so it's always useful to know that, and obviously when Öhlins change the spec and will service them, they put the stickers on for us. This has the R spec spring in it, so R10190, and the R springs are calibrated at Öhlins, so they're more accurate in their spring rates compared to the normal off-the-shelf stuff, and they also come in smaller increments. So this is a 102.5 or 1025 Newton per millimetre spring. Normally on most shocks you get a half Newton at a time sort of range, so these are in quarters, so it's a bit more accurate, so you can get your spring rate a bit more accurate as well. The shaft is titanium nitride coated to reduce friction and stiction. Up here on the top of the spring, instead of just having a washer, there is two washers and a little bearing plate. And so the plate with the bearings in it gives everything a little bit easier time moving, because when the spring compresses it twists ever so slightly as well. And so with having that on there, it stops it trying to adjust the preload, or basically reduces friction and makes the spring move a little bit easier. The last difference on this shock, and you can get this option on other slightly cheaper shocks as well, is the pneumatic preload adjuster. So that I can't move by hand, but if I add on my little gas cylinder, my air cylinder over there, I will show you how it works. On normal shocks, your preload adjustment would either be a pair of lock rings that you adjust with a C-spanner, which obviously isn't ideal on a race bike because it takes a long time, or you can have a hydraulic adjuster, so you can have a remote on it or a little hydraulic adjuster right on the body, and they're relatively cheap in comparison. They're quite easy to adjust and they're relatively reliable. But it is possible for, if there's a leak, to lose your hydraulic pressure and therefore the preload adjustment while you're riding the motorbike. Unusual, but not entirely unknown. So this is a pneumatic one, and at the moment the preload is solid, but if I add in a gas cylinder, that takes the load off the spring, and then I can just move the preload adjuster by hand. So that is 1mm. Take the hydraulic off it, and now my preload is set. And it doesn't matter what happens now, that can't change. So it's a lot more reliable, and it's in smaller increments because we can go 1/4 mil at a time. So put the gas cylinder back on, wind the preload back to where we had it earlier, pressure off. Now this has 12 bar of pressure in it at the moment and is only half full, and so obviously you need quite a lot of pressure because you're having to force the spring out of the way, and if it's in the bike you also have to be forcing the weight of the bike out of the way as well. So that is a natty little tool, and let's face it, just looks funky as well. We also have the big fancy billet machined Suter swinging arm in the bike, and to connect the swinging arm to the shock absorber we need a linkage. So this linkage is obviously differently machined and manufactured to the original, but it also has a different adjuster on it down here. Now part of the reason for this is this can be used as basically a quick and dirty ride height adjustment in pit lane, because the way the swinging arm sits you can't actually get the ride height adjusted in the shock very easily. So what you can do is undo the pinch bolts a little bit, turn that, and that gives you more or less ride height in the bike. What it also does is ever so slightly changes the shock linkage ratio as well, so you've got to be very careful when you adjust those that firstly you don't go too far, and then ideally if it's just the ride height adjustment you've been looking for in pit lane, when you get back in the garage after the session you would get to the ride height adjuster on the shock, on the bottom of the shock, you would adjust that instead and then put this adjuster back to its sort of datum position. The the linkages are available in different rates as well, so you can get more or less progressive ones depending on where you're trying to generate the grip, how you're trying to get the shocks to react. It all gets relatively complicated pretty quickly. While we have the shock out, it's an excellent time to take the swinging arm out of the bike. Now obviously we don't actually need to take the swinging arm out of the bike at the moment, but this is an excellent time to actually be learning how stuff goes together and what you need to undo. So hugger off, quick release connector for the rear brake line, sort of quick release Motec connector on the rear wheel speed sensor, chains hooked off the front sprocket, obviously shock's already out, and then we'll just pop the swinging arm out. It gives us a really good chance to inspect everything, make sure the bearings and everything look good. If anything needs greasing we can redo that, and it's also a good opportunity to actually try stuff, because if there is a little thing that's awkward, it's much better to find it in the workshop than it is when you're in the paddock in a rush. Right, let's get this arm out. So with the swinging arm out of the bike, we've checked behind the bearings, make sure everything's greased and clean, obviously giving everything a little bit of a wipe over. This swinging arm, with the rear brake attached to it, and the chain on it and the spindle in it, is just over 10 kilograms, so it's not floating away light, but then there is quite a lot of billet bits in it, because this whole middle section is all machined from billet, so there's machine marks absolutely everywhere in here. The side plates are also machined from billet, all the sections are machined from billet, and then they're welded together, because like we've said in previous videos, it gives you a better control of the wall thicknesses, so you can make it exactly as you want. If you're fabricating out of sheet, you're basically stuck with one thickness. Obviously we've got nicely machined out bits to take the weight and the stress out of it in there as well, little caliper hanging down there, and obviously our quick release spindle and everything. Right, now we're happy with that, I think we can put it back in the bike. This isn't the Rapid Honda Superbike. This is our pathway bike / superstock bike from last year. And the reason there's no Superbike front end in the Superbike is because the Superbike front end is in the pathway bike, or the Superstock bike, depending on which electronics we have on it. The reason we have the Superbike front end in the Superstock bike is because I need to actually go on track and bed the brake discs in, because we have our lovely new Brembo setup, but before we go to Spain I want to bed in all of our new brake discs. Obviously we could do it in Spain, but then we lose a day's worth of good Spanish track time, whereas I can go to a cold wet racetrack in England in February and go and bed them in. It's not going to be as much fun, but it is going to be more productive than when we get to Spain. There are two reasons that I'm bedding in the new brakes and not Franco. The first one is he's a bit excitable, so I send him out on a racetrack with new brakes, and about half a lap later he forgets he's meant to be bedding brakes in, which is not the best way to do them. Whereas I am older and more wise about these things, and I'm slower than him anyway, so even if I'm going faster, I'm still going to be giving them an easier time than he would give them. The second reason is there is a testing ban, which means Franco can't ride that because it's not just a Superstock bike. He is allowed to ride the Superstock bike, but because that's got some Superbike bits on it, if we let Franco ride it, it's a little bit naughty in the rules. And so I get to do it. Tough life. The first box of bling to turn up for our Superbike is from Spider. So big thanks to Tom at Motorcycle Race Parts for sorting this out. So we have clip-ons, rain lights, rear sets and lever guards, all from Spider. This is very similar to the stuff we used on the Superstock bike last year. The quality is mega, so we're really, really pleased to have Spider on our Superbike. In fact, let's get some of it and have a closer look. So even before we start fitting stuff, it looks bling. Spider have been really good. They've got Franco's logo on there, obviously the Spider logo on there, and the quality of these things is just spot on. Even the carbon bits, and I am fussy with my carbon, even the carbon's really nice. So that is absolutely top drawer. And in a bit, we'll get some of that on the bike. And that is our rear sets fitted. We particularly like the Franco-born branding on there, because so that looks really, really cool. Now, interestingly, these Honda rear sets, they look very, very sturdy, and even with the carbon heel plates, they are actually a little bit heavy. So we have saved, just on the gear lever side alone, 84 grams swapping from the Honda ones to the Spider ones. Now, I actually think these look better because they're nice in stealth and black and have the branding on them. We've used them before, they're absolutely mega quality, and because you're not allowed to restart if you crash at BSB anyway, the slight chance that you'll bend one and not be able to pick your bike up doesn't matter anyway. So, top job Spider. And while we're talking weight saving, Honda actually run a steel rear sprocket. Whether it's a slight paranoia, whether they've had failures before, maybe at TT or somewhere, I'm not entirely sure. I've always run aluminium sprockets on race bikes, never ever had a problem, and Renthal are that confident we're not going to have a problem that we're on Renthal sprockets. Now, swapping from a steel sprocket to the Renthal aluminium has saved us 502 grams. And bearing in mind that unsprung and rotating mass as well, that is another great saving. In preparation for running in the new Brembo brake discs in the Superstock bike, but with the Superbike front end in it, we now have the Superbike front end in the Stocker, but because it's not long before we finish bedding in brakes and then go to Spain, we've tried to preempt a few other little jobs as well. So, we don't have the Honda yokes anymore. These turned up yesterday, and these are Harris yokes, basically built a little bit different spec to the Honda ones, and the big thing is, these are offset adjustable, so you can change the insert in there and basically alter the offset between the fork leg and the steering stem. And that makes a massive difference to the trail amount that's in the front of the bike, and that makes a really big difference to the handling. Honda, of course, because they have their own machine shop, have several sets of yokes and just swap the yokes. We don't have that option because it's a little bit cost prohibitive, so we've gone for offset adjustable because it's better value, and if I'm honest, these Harris ones look lovely. We've had a few more bits turn up for this front end as well. So we've had our Spider clip-ons turn up. And so even the clip-on clamps are branded Franco born. So I hope we don't change riders because that's just going to get awkward now. Franco, you have been warned. We've also got some Renthal grip covers on top of our Renthal grips. So absolutely spot on, and big thanks to Hoco Parts and Renthal for sorting us out for grips. And again for Tom at Motorcycle Race Parts and Spider for sorting out our handlebars. Oh, and our Spider span adjuster as well. Can't forget that. The only slight issue we've got for bedding in our brake discs and then going to Spain is that we've actually only got 2 sets of the discs. These are not off the shelf. The offset and carrier for these is pretty much unique for these OZ wheels and the offset we want. And so Brembo basically make the carriers especially for us, and they've only actually been able to make a couple of sets so far, so we only have 2 sets to go and bed in, which means later on after Spain we've got some more to bed in, but it's not the end of the world. We don't actually have any rear discs for this Superbike yet either, but I think we'll worry about that another day. Thanks for watching, and join me again next time for some more rapid Honda Superbike fun.